Okay. And we are live, guys. Hello, everyone. And we at BlockShow Asia 2017, powered by the Cointelegraph, are live now. And I'm so happy to see old faces like Charlie and new faces like Llew, Susanne, and Anson at our YouTube roundtable, wholly dedicated to discussing the current trends and, of course, the launch of BlockShow Asia 2017. So what we're going to have today, right? So today we are planning to have a discussion, a small part of what will be happening at BlockShow, discuss current trends, debates, ICOs, and issues which the community is facing now. So before we start our hot discussion, I would love to briefly introduce you guys, our guests, our BlockShow guests, to the audience and to all of the viewers. So I would like to start with bright and famous Bitcoin pioneer, one of the first actual Bitcoin pioneers. And some people actually, I've heard that some people say that maybe he's Satoshi Nakamoto.
No way.
Okay, that's good. And so he's Chief Operating Officer at Jax, advisor at Changeling, founder at Bitcoin Foundation, Charlie Shrem.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So that's good, Charlie, that you said that you're not Satoshi, because if you are, that would wholly change the whole roundtable today.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Charlie was a speaker at BlockShow this year, a very smart, open, and sincere guy. I'm really happy to have you here and appreciate your presence. So thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Then goes Llew Claasen. Llew Claasen is a new face, new advisor to BlockShow by Cointelegraph, current executive director at Bitcoin Foundation, and the managing partner at Qtum Partners. And as you understand, he's an investor in different Bitcoin and blockchain companies. So Llew, also really appreciate your presence. Happy to have you here and really waiting for your insights on the Bitcoin scaling debate and the Bitcoin Foundation opinion and all of that.
Thanks, Eddie. Appreciate everybody's time.
Thanks. Now we go to Susanne Tarkowski. She's a famous blockchain entrepreneur, advisor to BlockShow, founder of BitNation, and of course, blockchain evangelist. So Susanne, welcome to our today's live, and looking forward to the talk and your thoughts on everything that we'll cover today.
Thank you, Eddie.
Yeah. And we finish with Anson Zeall. Anson is a co-organizing partner of BlockShow Asia, founder of CoinPip, chairman at Access Group, and member at Singapore FinTech Association. So he's one of the most prominent blockchain experts and evangelists in Asia. So Anson, happy to have you, and I'm certain you will provide us with great insights on why blockchain and Asia is a good match.
Thanks for having me, and great to be with the whole panel.
Thanks, Anson. So before we start our debates and discussions, I would like to inform everyone that a link to BlockShow Asia is right in the description. So follow the link, take a look at our great Bright event. We are planning to have a whole community there in Singapore in November, discussing blockchain solutions, companies, releases, ICOs, experts, and all of that in Singapore this November. So, and for sure, I would like to meet all of you personally, guys. So, yeah, continuing with our discussion. Guys, I really would love to start with the Bitcoin scaling debate. I guess it's the most interesting thing that the whole community is discussing right now. And personally, I'm really confused with what's happening. I saw so many announcements on different activations. For example, Charlie, I saw your tweet not so long ago where you were celebrating in Las Vegas this BAP 91 activation. But guys, I would really love you to elaborate on all of that, on all of what is happening. So, as I understand, right now, the first phase of BAP 91 was activated, right? But it doesn't guarantee anything. And there are a lot of predictions from different companies saying that it's a fake and that all of the miners will abandon BAP 91 at the next phases. So let's just discuss what's going on. Charlie, as I know, you're really deeply involved in the process. So can you just briefly tell what's going on and where the community is now?
Sure. So originally when Segwit was announced 2 years ago, they had set it as a 95% miner activation threshold. And what that does is you need 95% of hashing power to activate Segwit. A lot of people say that this was kind of like not a good idea because Segwit isn't a hard fork. And so why did you require a super majority of miners? Why wasn't 70% or 80%? Because it's opt-in. You're not forcing anyone. So there was a big scaling debate over the past 2-3 years, and we can skip that for a second. James Hillard invented a new way to actually signal for Segwit, which was BIP91. And what BIP91 did was it created kind of two activation systems. It said you only need 80% of miners to signal for BIP91. And once that section is activated, then everyone else has to signal BIP141. And anyone who's not signaling BIP141, their blocks won't be accepted by the rest of the network. Yeah. So BIP91, there was a lot of different reasons why BIP91 actually activated. Was it BIP148? Was it user activated soft fork? Whatever, we can skip that for a second. So at this point, BIP91 activated last week, and we're very excited about that. And once that happened, all the miners are now signaling BIP141. And what'll happen is right now, if we're out of 2016 blocks, 1,300 blocks, about 70% have been signaling for it. So we have another few hundred blocks, and that should be activated. And when that's activated, everything will be good to go.
So it's the Segwit actually will be activated, right? And there will be no hot fork because of that.
Well, anyone can fork Bitcoin. Like I can go right now, and if I have some hashing power,
with all this Bitcoin Cash, right, happens.
So what Bitcoin Cash is right now is it doesn't exist yet, but it's via BTC is leading it, and they're saying we're going to hard fork with 5% hashing power into this Bitcoin Cash thing. And that's okay. It's fine. You know, a lot of other things are hard forks like Dash or whatever, and it's not the first one. The only other difference here is that all Bitcoin holders will get free money if Bitcoin Cash survives. So we'll see what happens. But a major chain split that we were worried about is not going to happen. No.
That's great. And regarding the Segwit itself, so we have Segwit and we have Segwit 2X, right? So these
Segwit 2X is just pretty much a combined Segwit plus 2 megabit hard fork, and that's because of the compromise. But Segwit itself is amazing because it's not just like the capacity increase is only a very small part of it. Mm-hmm. Segwit is a combined package. It's like the key for Bitcoin to do a lot more than it's doing now, and it's a lot of different technologies bundled into one package. It fixes things like transaction malleability. It reduces the size of transactions. It enables the ability for things like smart contracts down the road and side chains and drive chains, all these different things. It kind of like enables that ability. So it's not just transaction size increases, but it's a lot more.
Yeah, and what is the actual process of activating it now? So the first phase has passed, right? And what is going now? When actually it's going to be activated, and or it's already
everything's going to happen in the next few days.
Okay. And for a regular Bitcoin user, in case Segwit is activated, nothing will change, right? There will be no, so they can just keep their Bitcoins as it is.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So, so to continue with discussion, we are speaking a lot about the technology part, right? But as I understand, the invention of Bitcoin itself was not just a technology thing, but a social thing, right, as well. So do you think that this Segwit is a good social decision as well in terms of the community? Because as I understand, it was a very tough decision, and many friends that were like were friends at the very beginning of Bitcoin were now in huge argues because of this Segwit and hard fork and all of that thing. So, do you think that Segwit is actually not just a good technology decision, but a social decision as well?
So perhaps I'll take this one.
Yeah.
I think that we still, it's definitely, we certainly appear to be making progress in terms of activating Segwit. It looks likely at this stage that Segwit is going to activate on the live network. It's not yet super clear that there is no hard fork that's going to happen. Certainly, there's still a group of people that still believe that a user-activated soft fork is desirable, combined with all sorts of other things, which we don't have to go into detail, because the point is we don't know until we do know what is going to happen, say, for example, on the 1st of August. Now, of course, we'd all like to believe that everybody in Bitcoin wants to get along and that we all ultimately want it to succeed. The challenge is that we don't always agree on how we want it to succeed. And so we don't necessarily share the same ideals around sort of the relevance of things like second layer solutions or block sizes or things like that. Some people in the community believe that it's more about security than it is about, say, low transaction fees and quick transaction confirmation times. Whereas others believe it's more about security and independence from control. And there is no right answer. And that's the beauty of Bitcoin. It is what we want it to be. And so I do believe that there is still a risk that we will have at least two chains, simply because we have these two groups that for the last 3 years haven't been able to agree on the right upgrade path. And it's not going to suddenly change just because the threat of the user-activated soft fork forced the creation of Segwit 2x. And we could get into a lot of detail about what those dynamics were, but the gist of it is that we still do have two groups that do not agree with each other, and the economic incentives are so large now because of the value of the network that I think it's highly likely that we'll have at least two major chains that arise out of this process. So to the short answer of, do I think that Segwit is a good social solution, is I think that the issues have all along not necessarily been about the right upgrade path technically, but rather our inability to socialize that solution. And maybe the answer was that we would never have been able to socialize the solution because philosophically, at least one of the groups does not actively resists coercion, actively resists coordination. And so the very idea of getting together in a room and sort of agreeing on an upgrade path would be ridiculous for that group of people, whereas people that were participated, say, in the New York agreement, that was the whole nature of it, is let's get together and let's compromise. So, and incidentally, do I think that it is such a bad thing? I was originally in the group of like, the problem with the chain split is just going to be that we will create confusion. The average person on the street's not going to know which version of Bitcoin to use, and that's aside from sort of technical issues and does the chain survive and replay attacks and reorganization. Forget about that stuff. It would just be the confusion of so which one is Bitcoin? And frankly, suddenly, while there was originally 21 million Bitcoin, suddenly, we have 42 Bitcoin. And so how does that influence its ability to act as a store of value? And I don't really have a good answer yet, but what I do believe is that the small number of people that have adopted it compared to the number of people that we hope will adopt it in the long term means that although there is the risk that there will be short-term challenges, and that I do believe we'll have at least two chain, whether or not both will survive, we don't know. I think it's certainly going to be an interesting time, and I think the long term I'm confident about, but the short term it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, thanks. And I would like to ask this question because we have Segwit and hard fork, right? So both want scale, both want growth, security, and so on and so forth. They just have absolutely different opinions on that. And you guys, what are you for? What decision you are following? It's Segwit or a hard fork?
It's not either or. It's not. It's like saying, what do you like better, apples or potatoes? You know, it's
Okay.
not really like a good. It's not a good analogy. It's there are two ways to upgrade the Bitcoin system. There's things that are soft forks and things that are hard forks. It all comes down to what is backwards compatible. So if there's a major update that needs to be made, sometimes it can't be made via soft fork and needs to be made via hard fork. Hard forks are dangerous in a way that it could cause a chain split if everyone doesn't agree to it. So if some people decide to not hard fork, you have two chains. Or soft forks don't really have that issue. So you'd say to yourself, okay, so everything should be done via soft fork because it's a lot easier that way. Not everyone needs to upgrade at the same time. The issue with that is the way the Bitcoin protocol was built is not everything can be done via a soft fork. So the idea of, for example, changing the size of the blocks can't be done via soft fork. So what Segwit, one of the things that Segwit does is, instead of increasing the block size, it moves data around and enables you to fit more data into the blocks, and a bunch of other things like that. So it's not whether you're for Segwit or hard forks. It's how do you see the ability for us to scale in the future? What do you think the best system is? But again, it's also not. It's all political now because it's no one disagrees that Segwit is bad technology. Everyone agrees that Segwit is good, which is why we saw the 95% activation. It all comes down to politics. Who do you think should be working on Bitcoin? Do you like the core developers? Do you like other people? It's all politics. It's all egos and games. It's childish, to be honest with you. It's stupid.
Yeah, I fully agree. So we started with the independent technology and ending with this standard politics around this, right? Yeah, I just know that all of the viewers and the community that I'm talking to now is very, very curious to know what will actually happen then. And yeah, waiting for that. I'm really impatiently waiting to see what will be in the nearest days and the August one, because it's like very, very interesting. Yeah, but anyway, in case of a hard fork, as I understand, as Llew said, it's possible, right? It's still possible to have a hard fork. So how will actually, do you think the community will react? So firstly, what people should do with their Bitcoins at this point? I'm, for example, very interested to know what should I do with Bitcoins in case of a hard fork? And how do you think the community and these two new Bitcoins will react into this decision, right? Maybe, I don't know, there will be a drop in price, or this drop will be just temporary and it doesn't mean anything. So just want to understand, in case of a hard fork, what do you think will happen with the whole community?
So perhaps I'll comment on that, unless somebody else wants to take this.
Yeah, please, Llew.
If we just look at the math tells us that if we have, for example, a chain split into two main chains, forget for the time being about Bitcoin Cash, then in theory we increase the money supply or double the money supply. So all other things being equal, we should have a situation where the value of the two networks combined should equal the value of the original network, but it wouldn't happen immediately. So in theory, you would have a situation where, let's say, for example, price is $2,500 right now, and you double the money supply. In theory, the two networks combined, the price of the token should be combined half of that amount, so say $1,250. In reality, that's unlikely to be the case, simply because if we do actually lead to a situation where there is a solution, at least in the community's mind, where you can now contribute to whichever project you believe most strongly in. So do you want to, you believe more strongly in say, second layer solutions, or do you believe more strongly in on-chain transacting? And then that will tend, just in theory, again, that should lead to a situation where there is a large amount of money that wants to get into Bitcoin and is just kind of waiting for the resolution of the scaling issue. And so just the fact that in theory you then have these two groups that can get on with building the Bitcoin that they want to build, we should find a situation where given enough time, and I don't know how much that is, that we may not, the network, the two networks may actually end up being worth more than the original network. But there's so many if maybe that it's difficult to say with certainty. I think that my view, and it's not investment advice, is that if you're holding Bitcoin now, make sure you have access to your private keys and hold on until at least September.
So no exchanges, no third parties, only your private key, only on your computer.
You shouldn't be keeping coins at any third parties anyways. Like, you should never, unless you're actively trading on an exchange, you deposit Bitcoin, you trade, you withdraw. There's no excuse for anyone leaving money on a third party at any time at all.
So here, everyone listening, guys, we have a few questions coming from the chat. I will just take one of them. It's about Bitcoin actually, and so the question is: Bitcoin was not supposed to have heavy fees. It was designed to be used by unbanked and those without access to financial systems. Why is it so far from that now? So that's the question, so maybe one of you would like to answer. What do you think?
What's the question?
So the question is why Bitcoin is so far now from being what it was designed to be, like to have low fees, to have micro.
It's not. Whoever said that though? I mean, Bitcoin. Bitcoin was designed as decentralized peer-to-peer cash system. And there's a cost for decentralization. If you want to be able to move large amounts of money within seconds, they're going to have to pay for it. It was never designed for things like micropayments. It was never designed for things like this. But even so, the mempool is empty right now. You can get a transaction confirmed for like a few cents within a few minutes. I just did it. Like, there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt around, or FUD around, like what Bitcoin is doing right now, and it's really, there's no issue. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do, exactly, and it's working beautifully, in my honest opinion. Bitcoin has never been better than it is right this minute.
Actually, I would agree, because yesterday I was testing the Bitcoin payment system for BlockShow Asia, and I just sent, I made the priority fee, and it was sent in seconds. Right, and received the necessary amount of confirmations really in seconds with the priority fee. So for me, that's the same. It really works. Yeah, it's very expensive now, but anyway, I guess after the scaling debate ends, things will change, and all of these transactions and they will be made much faster. So no problem here, right? Yeah. So one sec. Do we have other interesting questions? Okay, we will get back to them later. Okay, guys, so ending the topic of the Bitcoin scaling debate, you've all heard, I guess, about yesterday's announcement from SEC, right? And this SEC report where they say that DAO tokens, they are concluded as securities, right? So, yeah. I have a lot of questions after that. So my first question is, what will happen with the DAO creators? But not so long ago, it was answered. So as I understand, the DAO creators, after this announcement, they won't be sued. So they won't do anything with them.
Well, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, is just one kind of like enforcement office. So they said they don't recommend any enforcement at this time. But who knows what other branches of the government. Any state can bring charges. Any district can bring charges. Anyone. I mean, the local police department here can bring charges if they want to. So we don't know.
Yeah, and what do you think? What are the consequences actually of this decision for all of the future ICO makers and for already completed ICOs? Maybe, for example, I'm planning to do an ICO, and I'm really planning to do that. So, what does this announcement from SEC means to me now in comparison with what was before this announcement? For me as an ICO creator.
So my view on that is, and we were actually dealing with this issue just last week because the Uniform Law Commission was trying to, in the US, was trying to pass, create a model state law, which was kind of looking to legislate around cryptocurrencies and define it as distinct from money transmission services. And one of the things that they had been in the original draft was how does the UCC Article 8, which is effectively that definition of securities, how does that apply? And I guess the short answer to all of this is that it's not really a surprise that it is possible that a token can be considered a security. So nobody should be surprised by the fact that the SEC said, guess what? We think the DAO token was a security. The issue is that, for me anyway, is that the SEC doesn't deal with under which conditions, or except for kind of letting us believe that it's probably relating to something called the Howey test. It doesn't tell us exactly, so under which conditions would they classify it as a security and which conditions would they not classify it as a security. And if you think, well, this doesn't really matter to anybody else in the world, the challenge is just that, and that you should probably, if you're going to do an ICO, just exclude the US or only accept accredited investors in the US, and then you're in the safe. And the reality is that that's not really solving the problem, because the challenge is that what the SEC did not deal with is to say, so what about the exchanges now? Because in theory, if you're an exchange and you're based in the US, let's say, for example, Poloniex, and you now have these unregulated or unlicensed securities that you're enabling trade in, and that you're not registered as a securities exchange, you've got a problem. And so the challenge there is just that these centralized exchanges, suddenly the business model becomes problematic and open and exposes them to risk. And if we no longer have liquidity in these tokens, then one of the fundamental reasons why there was so much money being raised in these via ICOs is under risk. Now, for me, the other challenge around the SEC, or the comment about the DAO being securities, is that it wasn't in response, at least not to my knowledge, in response to somebody having lost money and going and said, hey, please protect me, I've been taken advantage of. And so the challenge with these regulators is that they suggest that they're looking after the average person, and that's why they're pursuing these actions, or that's why they're performing these investigations. But the reality is that in this particular case, I'm not aware of anybody actually having gone to the regulator and said, please look after my interests. So, there's no loss that's been incurred, and yet there is a regulator that is stepping in. And to Charlie's point, it's not even the only regulator. So, depending on whether or not you're speaking to the commodities regulator, or you're speaking to the securities regulator, or the UCC, the comptroller of the currency, they have all got a different view on what is this thing, like what is a cryptocurrency. And so, like, let's just get down to nuts and bolts here, is that as of today, even if you say, for example, simply because there was an ICO for Ethereum, you could argue that today there would be legal risk if you were an exchange and you were enabling the trade of Ethereum. And that, it's a little bit like the SEC has just created FUD and kind of like not resolved the issue. Instead of just saying, okay, well, we will at one point in time, once we have all the information and once we can be clear on what our recommendation is, then we'll make a comment. They've made a comment which says, it's going to be security unless you can convince otherwise. It just creates new problems, and the challenge is that it will not be. I don't expect that it will be the last regulator across the world that is going to take this rather awkward view of, is it a security or is it not a security? Is it a commodity? Is it currency? Is it, and it's just, it's unfortunate when we have these comments that are made by regulators that don't provide the full picture, and so they're not really guidance. They just kind of like, hey, we're watching you, you better behave yourselves, which just, it discourages people from doing any ICO. So if I was, for example, scheduled to do an ICO today, and you know, overnight I suddenly found out that there was, or yesterday afternoon in the US, I found out that the SEC suddenly had a comment about this. The first thing I would have done, if I was if I was incorporated in the US, I would immediately stop with that ICO. The second thing is,
yeah, sure, go on.
Yeah, the second thing is, if I was not incorporated in the US, I would exclude all Americans immediately. Gotcha. Because it's just too, and yes, of course, you could now say, oh, well, you know, what about accredited investors? But there is so much uncertainty in the US at the moment that one has to question whether or not those risks are worth it.
Yeah, we actually have Susanne. She's planning to do an ICO soon. Yeah, it will be great to know her opinion on that. So, Susanne, what did you feel yesterday when you saw that, and what are your thoughts on that and plans now?
Well, you know, so I did the first ICO in 2014, and everyone was discussing the exact same questions then, and people typically, even back then, blocked US addresses, US IP addresses, and had in the terms that, you know, US investors were excluded. At the time, SEC hadn't made an official statement. Uncertainty was pretty clear already. So I just don't perceive it as a huge change, because, you know, that has always, anyways, been kind of the case, even though it wasn't so clearly formulated for years, really, since the beginning. So, I mean, I don't really see that as a huge change, other than maybe from people who, the only kind of long-term possible consequences I can see with this is if other countries start to copy the same regulation, because if it sets a precedent, that is the real danger I see with it. But otherwise, you know, US was always kind of screwed up anyways.
Yeah, that's the thing. What will other countries do now, and regulators of other countries do? So maybe they will just follow what US, because US is like an example, right? They can follow it as an example and make securities everywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's going to take time, I think. You know, that's not going to happen overnight. And I think we're also seeing a lot of other countries looking more favorably at it, like Singapore, for instance. Switzerland has always been rather friendly against it. And there are many other jurisdictions like Estonia, Isle of Man, etc., that are working on different ways to make it more Bitcoin and token friendly.
Yeah, but let's imagine that, for example, most of the countries where all of the communities exist, like Russia, Europe, US, and I don't know, China, they take it as commodities, right? And what will happen with the ICO market? So, for example, you want to do an ICO, so you need to register in every single country, right? So you need to be to be legitimate, or how you should do that. What's the process here?
Well, so it seems, I mean, obviously there's no set process, and it's a changing landscape. So, you know, there's not one way to do it. But the kind of best practices at the moment seems to be to register in one of the friendlier jurisdictions, let's say Singapore or Switzerland, and basically issue the tokens from there, if you like, or under their jurisdiction. And that's basically it.
Yeah, but for example,
and then also block the US IP addresses and the rest of it, and put in the sales contract that's not allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, my comment on sort of what's going to happen to ICOs now is that, I mean, that Pandora's box is open. We can't put it back in again, and many people have argued that the reason why ICOs came about in the first place, aside from having the enabling technology, is that it is really, really difficult for you to get early stage investors to contribute to these projects. And so if it was a question of there was already access to angelless investors or VCs that were putting money in, then we may not have had this challenge in the first place. So it's not gonna stop. The question now just becomes, do we, for example, have new organization structures? Do we issue tokens out of different jurisdictions? And I'm not suggesting that one should try to avoid, so I'm not suggesting that you should avoid being legal. What I'm suggesting is that regulators are regulating things that they don't fully understand and that we don't fully understand. And so creating this legislation so early on just creates problems that we can't possibly understand. And once we do understand, these regulations are already there. So, I think that there's no doubt that that ICOs as a funding mechanism is here to stay. I think that we'll see at least two different types of tokens arise. The one where there's where issuers embrace the security nature, and there are others where issuers have strong utility in the token. And I think that you're right about, I agree on those jurisdictions as well. And I think Malta is another one that kind of wants to become more important. So the point, once again, is not to kind of, look to jurisdictions where you can do something that's illegal. It's that it should be legal under certain conditions, and making it difficult right now, I believe, is to issue tokens is, I think, reckless, and frankly is pushing innovation out of the US.
Yeah, because the initial idea, right, of these ICOs is that you can simply put an idea or a product and fund it, right? And if, for example, such heavy regulation will come to each country, and and the problem is that they actually don't understand what they regulate for now. That can kill, right? That can kill the initial idea. That can kill the main feature of these ICOs.
So just to comment on the point saying that Singapore is being a bit more friendlier than other jurisdictions, if you compare, it's more like because Singapore is trying to make itself as the fintech innovation hub, and at the same time, if you look at the regulators in Singapore, they actually, compared to many regulators, they actually do know what they're trying to do. So, for example, the project Ubin trying to tokenize this Singapore dollar and putting it onto the Ethereum blockchain was quite a big breakthrough for a regulator. So right now, I can definitely say that MAS, the central bank here in Singapore, is actually looking at how things should be done. But in a way, they are also not Singapore has been very successful in the last 50 years from the beginning, was because they study other countries very intently and seeing what other regulation or what other new projects they can bring to Singapore that help Singapore. Okay, so for example, with SEC putting this piece of statement out, definitely not only Singapore, but the regulators would then look and say, does it actually make sense for us? But most important is, for countries like Singapore, it's not because it's more friendly. It's just that they want to see what's out there first before they start regulating.
And Anson, what are with other countries? Like, for example, China. Do you know anything? Because I've heard Bob Lee was saying that regulation should come for sure, and it will socialize the crypto community and the ICO market and Bitcoin itself. And on the other hand, I saw different news saying that China was warning that you can go to jail because of the ICO, because of creating it or issuing tokens.
Yes. So Asia is very, just want to put a caveat, Asia is actually very diverse, even though I myself am Chinese, but the people living in Chinese and how they regulate the philosophy is actually different from, for example, from Singapore. But Singapore is also looking at how, what are the good elements that they can pick from China to implement into Singapore as well. But there is one thing that I know that I learned from the lawyers in China, that that people are more important than the law. Okay, so that's the philosophy behind China. If there is a group of scammers that intently wants to scam people, no matter what law it is, you've already hurt the people, and there will be punishment. So it's philosophy that's very different from Western countries. So if there was a very big case, I think a very big case of scam in the fintech scene before, yes, they were then jailed. Even how exactly it went, I'm not sure. Need to find out. But the main principle applies. People above the law. If you hurt the people, we will deal with you, basically.
Yeah, that's a great philosophy, because I had a question in my head before you said that how many people will go to jail before they actually make the law really working, right? So that was the question. But if they put people under the law, that's really that's an argument, right? But
so yeah, go ahead. Okay, so basically what I've been speaking to other regulators as well around the region. Same thing that I say to everyone. It's the
I guess Anson stopped, right, for everyone. Anson, we don't hear you.
To scam and the field is very different.
Anson, can you please repeat, because you were stopped. You had some bugs. You had some bugs.
Is it working now?
Yeah, please repeat what you've just said.
Okay. I was saying that to be classified as a scam, we really need to find the intent, which obviously isn't easy. But just like any startup, we know that more than 90% will fail, even as a startup, even with VC funding. So even in the blockchain scene, you have things so future-looking, it's going to have an even higher fail rate. So it's important for regulators and people to understand that there will be failures along the way. We just need to make sure that these guys, there is some sort of guidance that these are not really intent to scam, but are really just failed projects.
And guys, in terms of law, for example, you've heard about the latest hack of CoinDash, right? So they were just like, the website was compromised and the address was changed. And with all this, for example, when the regulation comes, I'm just thinking of how it looks from the regulation part. And when the website is hacked, who's responsible for this hack? Who will, I don't know, the founders, or there should be some kind of after a hack, when regulation comes, how the process will look like? So it will go, the police will come, or I don't know, the finance commission, or how that looks actually. What do you think? What will be the future? So regulation has come. You have absolutely legally created an ICO, but you were hacked, right? So for example, like the Dell or the CoinDash or any other ICO that is going to be hacked soon. So how will it look like? Have you ever thought about that? Or it's like, it's a problem that's not solved yet in your head, at least?
There's just a lot of issues at hand right now that we just need to prioritize.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the risk is that legislators and regulators try to resolve those questions, which you know, as you can see, they're kind of difficult to even understand the full context and scope of those kinds of issues. And frankly, so there isn't enough information. These things haven't happened enough yet, I guess, and I say that hesitantly, where you can kind of say, okay, well, this is how we should treat them. And that's kind of the point, is that it is early days. It is possible that these sorts of things can happen. Do I think that people should go to jail, for example, because there was a contribution to an ICO that was subsequently hacked? No. So, you know, do we need legislators or regulators to come in and suddenly set up rules to say this is what happens if you lose ICO money? I don't think so. I mean, the common law principles still apply here, and I think that it's so easy for us to forget them. So, you know, the reality is that that you were holding money on behalf of contributors or investors or whatever the nature of that ICO was, and And as long as you did everything you can to protect that money, I would question whether or not there's any liability. But I'm not the attorney, so I think the principle is just that there are lots of these things, and I agree that we don't have all the answers to them yet. And I think that what we can do as an industry, though, is avoid some of the harmful practices that have already come into ICOs. For example, uncapped raises are ridiculous.
Agree, absolutely.
So the idea that you could do that and that people are still getting in there is just bizarre for me. So I think there are many things that there are some own goals that we've also had in this space, and I think that there are certain things that we are going to have to get better at. Like, for example, we're going to have to get better at doing phased funding. We're going to have to get better at doing capped raises. We're going to have to get better at preparing business plans that explain why you need $10 million or $20 million or $100 million. You're going to have to explain how is the token going to be used or not used, and how does that enable a backer to price or not price the token. And the idea that you can kind of just get away with saying, well, we don't set the price, I think is perhaps sometimes a little bit misleading. And so again, I'm not going to pretend like I have all the answers either. I'm just saying that it's a new space. I think that regulating too heavily right now is just going to kill an opportunity to get more entrepreneurs funded. And to the point raised earlier on, I think that it's desirable to do so in a responsible way, and we shouldn't think of all the bad things that can happen and think about all the good things that can happen when you suddenly enable people to aggregate funds and invest in new opportunities that under any other circumstances would not receive funding.
Yeah, and to crown it all, I guess I wholly agree that regulation will come. I just don't agree that it will stop the development. It just should come slowly and step by step, right? So that the government should look how the actual market develops, essentially, right? And then should come the regulation. But to crown it all, right? When you're doing an ICO, think about the general things like incorporation, terms and conditions, securities laws, commodities laws, maybe KYC, consumer protection, because I guess many ICOs don't. So follow these rules, guys, for now, and everything will be okay. Let's see what goes next and what comes next. So we are very short on time, so I will just briefly get back to this SEC stuff. And as I know, they also said and stated that every single, let me find that, how was that exactly written? 1 second. So they said that every single exchange, I mean the SEC, right? That all exchanges, including platforms for trading blockchain-based securities, must register. And that really changed my mind. So what will happen with all of the exchanges now, and how they should act? Maybe some exchanges will just disappear or will close because of that. So what do you think, guys? Have you heard actually about this announcement?
Yep. So
yes.
My view on that is, I think centralized exchanges, those business models will be at risk in the US. I think that in the bigger scheme of things, centralized exchanges have always been a risk and kind of don't make sense in decentralized distributed networks anyway. So I think that we will see an acceleration towards peer-to-peer exchanges.
Got it. Yeah, that's a logical and interesting position. Yep. Okay. But for all exchanges operating now, will there be a major change? Maybe they should, I don't know, delete tokens from their exchanges, or how they should act for now?
You should definitely take a good look at what exchanges they have, what tokens they have, because if there's a token that's a security, the token creators are on the hook, the exchanges are on the hook, and all buyers are on the hook too. So any one of us, you know, if we bought DAO tokens, we could be on the hook.
So if you bought tokens, that's the same, right? And
yep. Securities fraud, yeah.
Okay, so what should I do? What should I do with that?
You're probably fine because, I mean, millions of people bought these things, or hundreds of thousands, and the government said that the DAO is not, they're not going to go after the DAO, but you just got to be careful in the future.
Oh, okay. Got it. So for now, that's okay. I'm safe.
I mean, the reality though is if you're not in the US, you're probably safe anyway. If you're a buyer.
Got it. Okay. Anson just wrote that he needs to go to Sun for. Yep.
No, I mean, yeah, just because I'm at a co-working space after an event just then, so might need to go up soon. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a call in 7 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Sure. So yeah, guys, we are very short on time. So let's just touch base one last thing that I wanted to touch base is this EOS, Tezos, Qtum ICOs and the projects that have raised millions of funding and millions of dollars. And all of them, if you Google, all of them are Googled like EOS vs Ethereum or Tezos vs Ethereum, right? Versus. So all of them are saying that they will overcome Ethereum. And I don't want to go into detail what all these projects are about, but mainly, what do you think about the new projects if they could actually overcome Ethereum? Because as I understand, most of them don't have any products, so they need time to develop, to deploy something. So what do you think? Why can they overcome Ethereum? And what Ethereum should do to solve these problems? And what are the actual problems of Ethereum for now?
Okay, maybe I can take this. So basically, if I look, because even as Access Chairman, I'm looking things from a much larger angle. So obviously, the tech stuff that I'm learning, I'm actually learning quite a lot in this chat. Yeah. So from a larger angle, when you look at how many ICOs are coming about, like we all said, it's here to stay. It's now how we are going to do going forward. But now, if we looked at the Tezos ICO, it was basically jamming the whole network during that period for when raising the ethers. So, I mean, do we really have to think which network is better? We need one winner. I think there's still a lot of room for a lot more platforms, just like you have NYSE, you have NASDAQ, just an example that we can have more platforms to actually accommodate different sort of use cases, including ICOs as well. But it doesn't really just have to be Ethereum wins all, because there are things that Ethereum can do and still some things that they can do better, but they're not there yet. And obviously there are other platforms that just finished their white paper and ICO, they would then, once they have it in production, it can be better than Ethereum. But the point is, I think it doesn't have to be a one wins all. Okay, you can have a lot of blockchains that exist together.
I got it. So that's one.
Yep. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, I 100% agree. I don't think it's like that one has to win. I think that the bigger issue here is that the problem is that the other two platforms have arguably raised too much money. And if you've been in VC for a while and invested in startups, and perhaps some of you have, you realize that the more money you raise, perverse incentives start to exist, and you actually start to do things that you wouldn't do under other circumstances. So it's actually not a good idea to raise as much money as possible and then try to deploy the capital as quickly as possible. You've actually got a better chance of surviving if you bootstrap and then raise smaller amounts of money. So if you compare, for example, what Ethereum did with $15 million, and you compare, I say, what EOS and Tezos has raised, I think that their first problem is that they've raised too much money, which is going to mean that they're going to be all over the place. And I think that Ethereum has got a lot of its own challenges, to the point that was raised around, if two ICOs, for example, can like clog up the Ethereum network, we've clearly got a transaction throughput problem. And then one starts to question, how scalable is Ethereum's architecture? And so I think that it's perfectly fine for there to be more than one project working in the same space, and let the Darwinian principles decide on which ones ultimately win. And at the same time, I don't believe that you end up with a situation where one wins. I think that the much more likely scenario is that you have hundreds eventually that are trying to solve the same problem, and even try to solve those problems on a local basis. And you end up with like 2 or 3 major players in each category or use case.
That's a great answer, and that's actually what I did not think about, for example, this live. And yeah, why not have all of these players working, and just to have several platforms which you can use, right? Of course, Ethereum, I guess, has now the tasks that they face now, and the work that they should do is even bigger than they have already done, right? It seems to me so. But anyway, that would be really great to have multiple platforms which you can use for building blockchain applications. Yeah. Okay. So guys, thanks so much for all of your answers today. That was a really great roundtable. We are very short on time. It's actually already about an hour. So thanks to everyone. Just for all of you to know, so this video, this roundtable was dedicated to BlockShow Asia launch. So today we officially launched BlockShow Asia 2017 in November 15 and 16 in Singapore. All biggest experts, blockchain companies, entrepreneurs, investors, and users will gather in one place to hear about the latest ICOs coming, projects releases, discuss and present different blockchain solutions presented in the exhibition hall. Discussion mates and community issues solved. So we also have a dedicated startup competition where best ICOs will be presented. So in case you are the community guy or you're just starting, you're welcome. Let's create the physical, open and like-minded community together right in Singapore and drive the blockchain forward. So thanks everyone. See you all in Singapore this November. Charlie, Llew, Susan, Anson, really appreciate your input, insights, knowledge, and thoughts that you shared with me. That was really valuable for me and with our audience. We definitely need to make it again.
Thanks for having me.
So much.
Till next show, guys. Till next show. Thanks everyone. See ya and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes.
Bye.
Yeah, guys. Everyone, Charlie, only you here.
Oh, all right. I'll see you later.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.